Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we'll be looking at the armistice and the end of World War I, and the beginning of the peace talks at Versailles Palace. So let's begin. At the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, World War I officially comes to an end. But how did we get here? So in late October 1918, sailors in Kiel refused to follow orders from the German High Command and government. This resulted in them refusing to perform orders on naval manoeuvres. This then spreads like wildfire to other cities, and it results in multiple armies deserting, mutinying, and surrendering. These are mostly due to because of the fact that the German people are frustrated with food shortages due to the British blockade. Germany and their allies then realised that it was no longer possible for them to win the war. The food shortages were not just the only problem, however, that caused this. It was also things like demoralisation from the lack of any wins recently in the war, especially with the failure of the spring offensive. Now, you may be wondering why the Germans had food shortages when they had just recently gained lots of agricultural land in the Treaty of Versailles. Well, we must remember that they gained it in that same year, and very close to the same period as the revolutions. This means that they did not have enough time to grow the food required to feed their population. And also, any food that was being grown was trying and failing to be sent to the troops, mostly due to failure in infrastructure. And in fact, mutinying in the German army was caused due to food shortages, and in fact there was also a problem of lack of discipline, as German soldiers, near the end of the war, ended up looting shops and houses just for food. And then, the German Emperor, Kaiser Wilhelm II, abdicates, and flees to Holland on the 9th of November 1918. And following a series of infighting, a new German government is formed in Germany, known as the Weimar Republic, and this is led by Friedrich Ebert. With the Kaiser gone, the government surrendered to the Allies, and after 4 years of conflict between Germany and the Allies, World War I finally ends at 11 a.m. on the 11th of November 1918. This becomes known as the Armistice Day, the day Germany signed an armistice, causing the fighting to stop. Now, on to the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was a peace agreement that marked the end of World War I, and it was signed on the 28th of June 1919 in, you guessed it, the Palace of Versailles. Discussions about what the treaty should include began in January 1919, and in June, delegates from 32 countries met at the Palace of Versailles near Paris to make peace after World War I. The peace they hoped would end all wars, and of course, we know that didn't happen. And one of the surprising countries that joined was Japan, and we will be getting on to what Japan did in World War I very soon. But they mostly took German colonies in Asia. However, one of the main problems was that no Germans were invited to the conference while the decisions were made, but they were expected to agree and sign the treaty. As you can imagine, this made quite a few problems. And in fact, it later resulted in many Germans coming to resent the treaty, as they felt that the decisions were made about them, not with them. Now, who dominated it? Well, I'm sure you can imagine. It was David Lloyd George, who was leader of Britain, Georges Clemenceau, leader of France, and Woodrow Wilson, the leader of America. They were often known as the Big Three. And in fact, other groups that are known as the Big Three were actually Churchill, Truman, and Stalin, or Roosevelt, depending on which US president you look at before Roosevelt died. But each of these leaders had contrasting aims. The French president, Georges Clemenceau, wanted Germany to be severely punished. He wanted them to be weakened, so they could no longer pose a threat to France in the future, as the two countries had a major history of conflict and bordered each other. And in fact, major conflicts at that time were Napoleon and the Coalition Wars, also Napoleon III and Otto von Bismarck, and general other wars across the colonies. And in fact, the Moroccan crisis was quite a near conflict for them. The British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, was wary of punishing Germany, however, too severely, but he was also aware that the British people wanted Germany to be made to pay for the war. And the American president, Woodrow Wilson, was focused on a long-lasting peace. He saw a strong Germany as the key to helping Europe rebuild. He arrived at the conference with 14 points, which we looked at last video, outlining his ideas which he believed would avoid future war and build a prosperous Europe. Now, as you can see, there is quite a big difference between these two leaders. Clemenceau wants basically no Germany, in fact, that would be his ideal dream, whereas Lloyd George wants Germany to be punished, but he doesn't want it too severely, and Woodrow Wilson wants Germany to be punished lightly. Now, as you can imagine, Lloyd George and Woodrow Wilson get on better than Clemenceau and Wilson. The main reason for wanting Germany to remain strong was actually to stop the spread of communism, as they saw it as a very severe threat, very similar to what would happen in the Yalta and Potsdam conferences. You see, they realised that if Germany was severely weakened, communism would fully seed itself in Germany, and so they knew they had to stop it. And so with a strong Germany, they thought it would be easier to stop. Germany was also severely punished by the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and the key points were Germany had to accept full blame for the war. This was known as the War Guilt Clause. Now, for all of those who have studied the sort of beginning of the war, you will understand that it's not really Germany who is at fault for this. It's actually Austria-Hungary and their a list of demands that they gave to Serbia. And so the fact that Austria or Hungary didn't accept any blame is quite a knockout blow for most Germans. They also had to pay full reparations for the damage caused by the war. It was later calculated to be £6.6 billion. We spoke about this in the first video. Now, since it's in pounds, it's a lot greater than what the Germans could afford. Alsace-Lorraine, which had been taken from France by Germany in the 1871 war, was returned to the French. Germany was also only allowed to have 100,000 soldiers, no tanks, no air force, and their navy could only have 6 battleships. They also were no longer allowed to build submarines. However, if you look at the time span between World War I and World War II, you notice that Germany builds up a submarine force quite well. That is because Germany, they found a loophole in the treaty which stated that they could no longer build submarines, but it didn't mean they couldn't keep them. And in fact, they managed to keep some of their submarines, which would then later influence their development later on. Now, as you can imagine, Germany was very proud of its army and navy. They, in fact, were one of the only European countries at the time, before World War I, to have conscription. And in fact, the treaty banned conscription. This was a major knockout blow for Germany, as they based themselves completely off this. And you'll see this in a lot of films, on YouTube, basically anywhere. Germany is extremely proud of their military, so this was really demoralising. But of course, it's also good because it means that Germany no longer poses a serious threat. The Rhineland, an area between Germany and France, was also had to be demilitarised. And this was good for France, but the Germans weren't happy about it. Anschluss was also banned. Now, Anschluss was an idea that Germany and Austria would be uniting. It was a treaty, in fact, that they could unite and create an empire in a sense, or basically just be together. And in fact, Germany did try to Anschluss with Austria after the treaty was signed, but that was stopped by Mussolini, and we will look at that later on. Also, the main idea that was accepted by Clemenceau and Lloyd George was Wilson's idea for the League of Nations, and this was agreed upon, and it was created. Its aim was to avoid the mistakes that helped cause World War I, although, as we know, it was unsuccessful, could not act decisively, and played favourites with bigger countries. The most notable examples would be Corfu and Greece and Bulgaria. I hope this video has helped you understand some of the terms of the treaty, and hopefully it'll understand how the war ended. We of course will be looking at the war throughout its entirety and other fronts, and we will be looking in depth on why it ended. Obviously we've looked at quite a few of the points of the Treaty of Versailles, but this was just to help you understand what was decided upon. We will be doing an even more in-depth video on that later on the line, to understand exactly every single point of the treaty, and yeah. so hopefully that will help you understand it. We'll also look at the impacts it had on Germany. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you, and please like and